Welcome to today's deep dive. I am so excited for this one because we are tackling something that I think almost everyone struggles with, which is how we react to complex
Oh,
problems.
absolutely.
Ah,
We usually just panic, right? We just react to whatever is right in front of us.
Exactly. And to unpack this, we're actually looking at the source notes on Jeremy Silman's seminal book, How to Reassess Your Chess. And a huge shout out to this fantastic YouTube channel, Better Every Page, for actually inspiring this exploration.
Yeah, it's such a great channel. And, this book came out in 1993, which is a really fascinating context because that was the absolute height of the Garry Kasparov era.
Right. The guy was just dominating.
Dominating. But it was also the dawn of these massive computer chess programs, like deep thought.
Yeah.
So you had computers that were starting to prove they could calculate millions of moves a second.
Which had to be terrifying for human players.
It was. And because of that, players naturally assumed, well, the only way to stay competitive is to just memorize more variations,
hmm
calculate faster, essentially try to become a machine yourself.
But this book proves the exact opposite, right? I mean, the core challenge here is what if memorizing moves is actually holding you back?
That is the whole thesis. Silman argued that reacting mechanically to your opponent is exactly why you're losing.
And I want to pause here for you listening because even if you don't play chess at all, maybe you don't even know the difference between a rook and a king, this framework is still incredibly relevant.
100%, it's a mental model for life.
Right, because when you face chaos, like a work crisis or just a completely unmanageable inbox, your default instinct is to react. You put out the fire closest to you without stepping back to figure out, why the house is burning.
You're just reacting to the immediate threat. And Silman's whole thing is about shifting from that reactive tactical mindset to a proactive strategic one.
So by the end of this deep dive, you're going to have a completely new lens for evaluating situations and making decisions. So let's just get right into it. If calculating moves is a trap, what does Silman replace it with?
Well, he introduces this foundational principle and he calls it imbalances.
Imbalances. Okay, break that down for us.
Yeah, so he argues that true strategic planning isn't about calculating 3 moves ahead. It's about recognizing the subtle differences between the two sides on the board. He defines an imbalance as literally any significant difference in the position.
So, wait, an imbalance isn't necessarily a mistake then?
No, not at all. It's just an asymmetrical feature.
Yeah.
Like you have something I don't and I have something you don't.
Okay, I see.
And to really grasp this, we have to talk about the pieces, specifically the minor pieces, so the knights and the bishops.
Right, and traditional chess rules basically say they're equal, right? Like they both get a value of 3 points.
Exactly. But historically, players always had this bias that the bishop was slightly better because, a bishop can slide all the way across the board in one move,
Yeah, whereas a knight has to do that weird, clunky L-shaped thing.
right? But Silman completely dismantles this. He says a piece's value is totally context dependent. A bishop is not inherently better than a knight. It depends entirely on the physical terrain of the board right at that moment.
It's basically like tools in a toolbox, right? I mean, a hammer isn't just universally better than a screwdriver. It completely depends on what you're trying to build.
That is a perfect analogy. So if the center of the chessboard is totally clogged up with pawns, like a dense forest,
hmm
those long-range bishops are useless. They just stare at a wall.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But a knight is the only piece that can physically jump over other pieces. So in a dense forest, the knight suddenly becomes an absolute monster.
That makes so much sense. And recognizing that terrain difference, that imbalance, that gives you your plan. You don't have to calculate 50 moves.
Exactly. If you see you have knights and your opponent has bishops, your whole goal is just to close the position. You build those pawn walls.
And if you have the bishops, you do the opposite. You want to blast the board open.
You got it. You clear the pawns out so your bishops have room to breathe.
Which kind of naturally brings us to the pawns themselves, because if they dictate whether the board is open or closed, they're essentially the terrain, right?
Yeah, they're the skeleton of the game. They move the slowest, so wherever they are is pretty permanent. And Silman shows how specific pawn formations create these lasting imbalances.
Like the isolated pawn, right? The notes mention that one specifically.
Yes, so an isolated pawn is one that's marched forward, but it has no friendly pawns next to it to protect it. Traditional doctrine says, oh, that's a terrible weakness. You have to waste your big pieces just babysitting this one pawn.
But the flip side is that an isolated pawn usually sits right in the middle of the board. So it's a target, yeah, but it's also taking up incredibly valuable real estate.
Right? It creates this dynamic tension. It's a weakness, but it's also a powerful outpost. And that dual nature leads us right into the concept of space advantage.
Okay, I really want to dig into this because the mechanics of space advantage were fascinating. It's not just about pushing your pieces forward, is it?
No, it's about restricting your opponent's mobility. You essentially suffocate them.
Suffocate them. I love that.
Yeah, if you have a space advantage, Silman has this counterintuitive rule: avoid trading pieces.
Oh, interesting. Why?
Well, think about the physics of it. If your opponent only has a tiny, cramped corner of the board to operate in, having all of your pieces jammed into that small space is a nightmare. They literally step on each other's toes.
Oh, right, because if you swap pieces off the board, you're doing them a massive favor. 3 pieces in a tiny space is fine, but 10 pieces crammed in there is just complete paralysis.
Exactly. By refusing to trade, you maintain that claustrophobia. It's an incredible psychological weapon. It forces them to make desperate moves just to get some breathing room.
Man, that is so applicable outside of chess, too. Speaking of psychological weapons, we have to talk about material balance. Because giving up a high-value piece, like sacrificing a rook for a knight, is usually considered a huge blunder.
Usually, yes. But Silman argues that sometimes you need to intentionally sacrifice material to gain a positional advantage.
So you're basically burning your own resources on purpose.
Right. You're trading tangible material points for intangible strategic dominance. You might lose points by sacrificing that rook, but in exchange, you permanently ruin their pawn structure.
Or you secure a great spot for your knight.
Exactly. You look past the immediate math and evaluate the long-term reality.
But that takes so much confidence. You really have to trust your read of the situation. And to do that, you have to anticipate what's coming next. Which brings up a concept I loved, prophylaxis.
Prophylaxis. It is the ultimate form of proactive defense.
It's anticipating and stopping their threats before they even happen.
Right. A reactive player just asks, what do I want to do next? But a strategic player asks, what does my opponent desperately want to do, and how do I quietly make it impossible?
It's like doing a pre-mortem in business. Most companies launch a product, watch it fail, and then react to the disaster.
Which is exactly what we do in life, too.
Totally. But with prophylaxis, you sit down before the launch and say, okay, if this fails in 6 months, what killed it? You identify the threat early and neutralize it.
That's a perfect parallel. But to use that effectively, Silman makes a huge distinction. You have to know if the features you're dealing with are dynamic or static.
Oh, yeah, let's pause here because this feels wildly applicable to everyday life. Dynamic features are temporary, right?
Very fleeting. Like, let's say your pieces are out and ready to fight, and your opponents are still stuck in their starting positions. That's a dynamic advantage.
But it has a ticking clock.
Exactly. If you don't act aggressively right away, they'll eventually wake up, develop their pieces, and your advantage just vanishes.
Whereas static features are more permanent.
Right, like a superior pawn structure. It's not going anywhere, and that dictates your pace. If you have a static advantage, you don't need to rush.
You don't have to force some crazy attack.
No, you just use prophylaxis, patiently maneuver, and slowly squeeze your opponent over time.
What's fascinating here is that when you synthesize all of this, evaluating pieces, space, pacing, you just completely transform as a player. You stop making random moves and hoping they blunder.
You let the terrain dictate a logical master plan.
But there is a huge philosophical twist here. As you learn about these imbalances, you realize they are deeply subjective.
This is probably the most compelling ambiguity in the whole book. Silman gives you this rigorous method, but 2 grandmasters can look at the exact same board, apply the principles perfectly, and come up with 2 totally different plans.
Because an aggressive player is going to look at the board and their eyes just lock onto the dynamic imbalances they want to attack right now.
And a defensive player looks at the same board and prioritizes the static imbalances.
Yeah.
They just want to slowly grind out an endgame.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting, and I kind of have to push back a little bit. If strategy is really that subjective, doesn't that contradict the whole idea of there being an optimal move? I mean, isn't chess basically just a math problem?
Well, that's Silman's ultimate point. Chess isn't just math. It's an art.
Really?
Yeah, the perfect objective move is kind of a myth for humans. The optimal move is just whatever move best fits your specific plan based on how you evaluated the imbalances.
That connects so well to Aaron Nimzovich's My System, which was also in the notes. Both of these guys are championing independent, creative thinking. They don't want you memorizing their blueprints.
They want you building your own.
Right.
And that's the universal message for the listener. When you're dealing with a career pivot or a financial crisis, you can't rely on someone else's blueprint.
You have to read the unique imbalances of your own life and adapt.
Exactly.
I love that. But I have to ask, how do we actually do that? Because I'm looking at my chaotic week, and I don't have knights or bishops. I have unread emails, overlapping deadlines, budget cuts. How do I map these abstract imbalances onto a real daily routine?
Well, Silman actually gives a very concrete framework. It starts with a concept called thinking in chunks. Instead of obsessing over individual emails or tasks, you have to assess the whole environment holistically.
Okay, it's like stepping back to look at the entire forest rather than just staring at the bark of one tree.
Exactly. Or think of a paramedic arriving at a multi-car crash. If they just run up and put a bandage on the first scraped knee they see, someone else might die of internal bleeding.
Right. You can't just react to the first visual stimulus. You have to triage the whole scene first.
Yes, and that triage is what Silman calls the thinking process. It's a step-by-step loop. Step one is evaluate the imbalances. You take a full inventory of the board.
Okay, so let's apply this to a real scenario. Say you're leading a software update and you are 2 months behind schedule. The team is burning out. If we apply step one, we aren't firing off emails yet. We are evaluating.
Right, so what are the imbalances there?
Well, maybe we have a massive budget surplus, so that's a material advantage. But team morale is completely destroyed, which is a severe dynamic weakness. And our competitor is launching their version next week.
A terrifying time imbalance.
Yep.
Perfect. So once you have that inventory, you move to step two, which is formulate a cohesive plan based only on those imbalances.
So not just doing whatever we did last time.
Right. In your scenario, the plan might be to use that budget surplus to hire emergency freelance contractors. That takes the pressure off the internal team, salvages morale, even if it means launching a little late.
We let the reality of the board dictate the plan, not our ego. Okay, what's step three?
Step three is only then do you calculate the specific tactical moves. Only then do you draft the emails to the freelancers and reallocate the budget lines.
That is so critical because our default is to do it backwards. Panic hits and we jump straight to step three. We start calculating, oh, if I tell my boss we're delayed, she'll say this, so I'll say that.
We just spin out these exhausting calculations without ever evaluating the fundamentals. It is a recipe for anxiety.
Totally. But this requires practice, right? It's a muscle.
It is a muscle.
Yeah.
And Silman insists you train it through post-game reflections, analyzing your past victories and defeats.
But the notes emphasize the victories part, which I thought was so interesting. Most people only do a post-mortem when something fails.
Right, they look for the blunder. But Silman says it is equally important to analyze why you won. When that presentation went perfectly, why did it work? What imbalances did you leverage?
You really have to look for patterns in your own psychology. Like, am I constantly rushing into things because I overvalue dynamic advantages?
Or are you ignoring long-term static problems because they aren't on fire yet? That reflective practice is the key to continuous growth of business, sports, anything. You evaluate, plan, act, and then brutally reassess.
So what does this all mean for you listening? I think it represents a monumental shift away from a frantic reactive life where you're just calculating the next immediate step.
Right, and evolving toward a holistic, strategic mindset where you patiently leverage the hidden imbalances around you.
And obviously, this knowledge isn't just for intermediate chess players at a club.
No, not at all. It's for anyone eager to cultivate independent thinking and adaptability. If you're tired of just reacting and want to start orchestrating, this is the blueprint.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into positional mastery. And again, a huge shout out to Better Every Page on YouTube for inspiring this.
And, this raises an important question I want to leave everyone with. If you look at the absolute biggest challenge you are facing in your life right now, what are the hidden imbalances you might be completely ignoring simply because you're too focused on reacting to the immediate next move?
Step back, look at the whole board. We'll catch you next time.